Thank you. Revelation chapter 12. We looked at verses 1 to 6 last week, which was just the introduction of how the Latin church, the papacy, would hound over the true church who was trying to give birth to the elect of God. Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 to 17. Verse 7. And there was a battle in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. But they prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, was cast out, which deceiveth all the world. He was even cast into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now is salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. But they overcame him by that blood of that Lamb and by that word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, which hath great wrath, knowing that he hath but a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth, he persecuted the woman which had brought forth the man-child. But to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water after the woman like a flood, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had cast out of his mouth. Then the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went and made war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandment of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. The title of our message this morning, Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 to 17, the woman and the beast. Now remember, we're in chronological order. We're taking a historicist approach to the book of Revelation. So we're between the second and third woe. So when it talks about the 1260 years, understand that we're right now about the time of the Reformation. So the material contained here in Revelation chapter 12 through 14 concerns that time period between the second woe and the third woe, which will be towards the end of the 1260 years. It is a general overview of this particular time period. In this morning's text, we read of the 3 main methods the dragon will use against the woman, the church, to defeat her in the latter part of that 1260 years. The text splits this time period into 3 sections. The first part, verses 7 to 12, concerns the time period during the Protestant Reformation, in which the true church gains much ground, but must do so under severe persecution. In the second attack, verses 12b through 16, the Latin church tries toleration to deceive the nations. It's the time we're living at now. And the third attack, verse 17, which has not yet come yet, the Latin church will turn aggressive again, making one last effort to destroy the true church before it is itself destroyed at the end of 1260 years. 3 points to our message this morning, verses 7 to 12a, the devil's first method, which he used during the Reformation, persecution. Verses 12b through verses 16, the devil's second method, toleration and complacency. And finally, verse 17, yet to come, the devil's third method, the final open war. Our text begins this morning in the days just before the Reformation, when the Waldensians were in Italy and Wycliffe was in England, and when they had first challenged the Latin Church. By the time Luther and Calvin come to prominence, the Latin Church, prompted by the devil, have settled on a plan of violence and torture to oppose the initial threat of the Protestant Reformation. In our second point, the Latin Church will attempt to pollute the true church by various deceptions, resulting in a church that seeks peace and toleration above sound doctrine. Finally, in our third point, the Latin Church will in the future turn again to violent persecution just before its final days are at hand. I have to tell you, I would never seen any of this in the text myself, relying entirely on historic interpretation. The works of Faber, the works of Poole, the works of Alexander MacLeod, who was an RP minister. They're the ones who came with this interpretation, and so it's very sound, it's there. I'm just saying I never would have come up with it myself. It's historic testimony. Verses 7 to 12a, the devil's first method, persecution. Verses 7 and 8. And there was a battle in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, but they prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. Here we have a symbolic narrative of a war in heaven between Michael and his angels and the devil, here called the dragon and his angels. Whenever we read of a battle in heaven in the book of Revelation, we know that it stands for something that is happening on the earth. There was at one time an actual battle in heaven in which the devil was cast down to earth, at which time he deceived Adam and Eve. Since the devil in our text this morning is about to deceive the earth again, as he did in the days of Adam, we have a story in which he is symbolically cast to the earth to wreak havoc upon the church. In other words, Michael and his angels did not actually fight with the devil in the early 1500s and 1600s. But the contest is the same in principle as that first actual war that occurred in heaven. In real terms, these verses are telling us that the devil is about to use his powers on earth to perform some great evil. Earth is about to become the battleground of a contest between the devil and his followers and Christ and his church. This refers to the beginning of the Reformation. It's the earliest days when the true church was just beginning to take a stand against the Latin church. This is the days of Wycliffe, the Waldensians, and eventually Luther. The stage here in our text in these first two verses is being set for a battle. Christ is the head of his church, and he will lead his true followers. He will try to establish his church on the earth. The devil has his church, which is the Latin church. And they will do all the bidding of the devil. So now we're getting ready for the greatest religious struggle in the history of mankind, the Reformation. Verse 9. And the great dragon, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, was cast out, which deceiveth all the world. He was even cast into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Stakes are going to be very high. The devil's going to be on the earth fighting his battle. And Christ is going to try to grow his church on the earth, and there's going to be a massive clash, the Reformation. As the first seeds of the Reformation are now being sowed, the devil will come to earth in order to oppose it. The devil will oppose the true church by erecting a false church that will be after its own design and influence. The devil will work hand in glove with the Latin church. The devil's first method to silence the Reformation church will be violence. He will convince the Latin church to issue papal bulls, torture, create inquisitions, and various other atrocities in order to silence the true church. The violence of these times is well documented in the old classic book, Fox's Book of Martyrs, which explains some of the atrocities the true church would have to suffer under this time. Christ as head of the church is the leader of the army of the true church, while the devil will be the leader of the Latin church, and that's who's going to be at war here. The result of the war is not doubtful, because as we know in 1 John 4:4, the greater is he that is in the saints than he that is in the world. This apostasy will force the true church to again flee to the wilderness. During this time, the true church is not destroyed, but it will be greatly persecuted. Verse 10. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now is salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ, for the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. As we just read in verses 7 to 9, the devil was cast to the earth to attempt to destroy the woman, the true church. His right arm will be the Latin church. However, the Reformation in the early 16th century is going to be a tremendous success. That's why the verse says, Now is salvation and strength. There's finally going to be a true church upon the earth. It is during the time of the Reformation that true salvation becomes available to the masses, rather than that false message of salvation that came from the papacy and dominated the Middle and Dark Ages. At least 10 countries will reject the kingdoms of the devil controlled by the Latin Church, and those countries will declare themselves Protestant and oppose the dragon. Salvation has come, as the verse says, to the earth. During this time, we see hope for the future of the true church for the first time. We get a first taste of the promised millennial reign of Christ, and we see the beginning of the end of the Latin church. Verse 11. But they, that is the saints on earth, the true church, overcame him, that is the devil in the Latin church, by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. As we said, the first method or strategy of the Latin church to be used against the reformers would be violence. The strategy of the true church will be testimony bearing. They will fight violence with testimony of the truth. That's all they'll do. They'll die testifying to the truth. During this period of apostasy, the true church is characterized by testimony bearing about the truth of their doctrine and showing their dedication to true gospel doctrines by martyrdom. They are the confessing church who is willing to die for what they confess. That will be the battle. Testimony bearing and martyrdom are evidence that a person is part of the true church in this time period. The woman brings forth those willing to die, those who love the gospel more than they love their own lives. The reformers often noted that papists never needed to die for their false doctrines. You ever notice we never have any martyrdom in the Catholic Church for their doctrines? There was no need of martyrdom to spread the false lie of purgatory. There was no need of martyrdom to spread the false lie of the worshiping of saints, or Mary worship, or the Apocrypha, or the office of Pope. No one had to die for that. There was no martyrdom for that lie. During the wicked reign of Antichrist, the lies prevailed and there was no opposition to the dragon. Martyrdom will only be asked of the true church, because they only have the truth. It is the true church that has to die for the truth of Christ. For instance, just think about Christ's role as prophet, priest, and king. Tyndale was sentenced to death and killed for advocating Christ's office of prophet when he tried to publish the words of Christ in the Bible. They killed him because he advocated the office of prophet of Christ. The life of all the reformers was threatened for advocating Christ's office as the final priest against the Latin church and her priests. The Scottish church was forced to suffer death for advocating the crown rights of Christ as king on earth. You notice we have to keep dying to prove that he's the prophet, the priest, and the king. And why is the Latin church killing us? Because we're advocating Christ as prophet, priest, and king? So we see it was by martyrdom that Christ's office of prophet, priest, and king were preserved by the true church. It is the true church that must suffer for the truth. No one, especially the Latin church, ever had to suffer for its lies. Verse 12a, therefore rejoice ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Although the first and second Reformation will be a time of martyrdom and bloody struggle, we may rejoice because many nations will turn from the Latin church. The Latin church will be severely wounded by the Reformation. This Reformation will be a picture of the millennial reign of Christ to come, a foretaste. It will also be a sign of the finality of the Latin church. We come to our second point, verses 12b to 16, the devil's second method, toleration and complacency. This is what we live in today. Verse 12b and 13. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, which hath great wrath, knowing that he hath but a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which had brought forth the man-child. Now that the dragon has been cast symbolically out of heaven, he will begin his worst persecution on earth. And we see that during the Protestant Reformation. The devil will be at his worst for his final 400 years of the 1260 years because he knows his time is limited. His wrath is increased because he has only a short time, 400 years at the most since the Reformation. Here we have a warning to the earth, especially those who lived during and after the Reformation. They are warned that the devil has come down unto you and is very angry because his time is limited. Notice the devil understands God's prophecy that he only has 1260 years. The devil reads Revelation correct. He understands the Latin church is 1260 years. Verse 14. But to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. Just so you understand, sometimes the church can come out of the wilderness and try to have a little reformation, but it always gets driven back to the wilderness. It predominantly will be in the wilderness for 1260 years. The devil, having been thrown out of heaven, now begins an even greater persecution against the true church. To guard against the second attack of the dragon, we're told the woman flees a second time to the place of safety, which had been mercifully prepared for her preservation before this 1260-year war began. And she is in no less peril from her deadly enemy than before. One major reason why the papacy was forced to change the method of her attack, which was persecution, was that during the Reformation, the Latin Church lost a great deal of its ecclesiastical and civil power. After all, it lost 10 nations. It could no longer rule by sheer force. 200 years of Roman persecution against the true church only strengthened it. It didn't work. During the Reformation, the church was able to make great strides, even to effect great change upon the earth. But now the woman is taken again into the wilderness. She's hidden from the devil in the wilderness where she's nourished and cared for. The Reformation did not bring the church out of the wilderness. She must return and complete the full 1260 years prophesied here by Christ. Again, the text here gives us the amount of time she must be secondary to the Latin church. Notice it's called a time, a times, and half a time. Now we've heard 42 months, which is 42 times 30, 1260. We've heard 1260 days, 1260 years. Now we get this time, times, and time and a half. Let's see what that adds up to. The total period of a time equals 1 year. So time would be 1 year or 360 days. 2 years means 2 times, or 2 years, which is 720 days. And half a year is half a time, which is 180 days. And so if you add up 360 plus 360 plus 360, or 360 plus 720 plus 180, you get to the same number, 1260. So we have 3 different ways that we've been told 1260 is the number. 42 months, 1260 years, time, times, times and a half. Always 1260. Here in the wilderness, the church will be protected from the presence of the serpent. 15 and 16 are probably the most relevant verses to our church age you will ever read in the Bible. Verse 15. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water after the woman like a flood, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. So here the enemy, the Latin church, controlled by the devil, now makes a second attack upon the woman in a new and unexpected mode of warfare. Having failed to destroy or stop the spread of Reformation by torture or death, which only increased it, they try a different method. The serpent now reacts to the church being taken into the wilderness where it is protected and hid. The serpent is said to cast out of his mouth water after the woman. The water is going to be a flood of false teaching. Since the devil can no longer hurt the church as it is hid in the wilderness, the devil changes tactics and seeks to flood the true religion with false doctrine. They're going to use the word Christianity and then pervert the word Christianity, which is exactly what they do. The serpent will use the Latin church to carry away the church with the flood of false doctrine. Notice the Latin church is said to be carried away. This means it offers no resisting to this false teaching of the devil. The Latin church will be content and be carried away by the devil and the power and influence he promises. The witnessing church will not be carried away by false doctrine. It is willing to die for its witness of the truth. The Latin church, will notice, is simply carried away by this flood of the false teaching. Verse 16, but the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had cast out of his mouth. We're told here now that the Latin church during this second method would flood the earth with deception and lies. But these lies would be so cleverly disguised that many would be deceived into believing that the Latin church stands as the church that God favors, as his main church. The devil's new tactic will be to deceive the nations under the veil of toleration. It will offer a peace that turns to complacency. This peace is no help to the true church at all. History teaches that after the Reformation there was a time of toleration of religion. But this, of course, did not help the Reformation. It was just another trick by the devil. We'll live at peace with you, Reformation followers, now. And now that we live under peace, what happened? Instead of fighting the true church, it worked within it to corrupt it. The papacy had lost 10 countries in Europe during the Reformation and soon would lose both America and France to atheism. The new tactic of the devil was to flood the church or dilute it. It offers the true church peace and establishes itself as a charity for the poor, the weak, and the sick. It makes itself an angel of light. It poses as an angel of light while slowly corrupting the church with idolatrous doctrines and teaching about salvation by works. This is what is meant by the saying, the earth helps the woman. The earth stands for the papacy, which becomes friendly or appeared to become helpful to those who professed faith in Christ. But this help from the papacy came at the expense of true gospel doctrines. And this tactic by the devil has worked. Just as the Reformation was about to flood the world with its teaching, the Latin Church reinvented itself as a church of peace and toleration. And the Protestant Reformation bought it. The Protestants bought it. The Reformation came to a sudden halt. The papacy continued and the Protestant churches were deceived by the change in the Latin Church. The Protestants no longer viewed the papacy as the Antichrist needing to be destroyed. It became friends with the papists. In England, they even adopted the Church of England, which was a compromise between the papacy and the Protestants. This spirit of compromise is what is meant by the phrase, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood. In other words, all the churches swallowed up the flood of the false teaching of the papacy. So much so that the church launched in the Reformation barely exists anymore. It has been deceived and coaxed into complacency in the name of toleration, reason, and the unbiblical notion of charity. Just to understand how well the devil's second method of complacency has worked, we need only remember that the church has made no improvements to worship or doctrine whatsoever since the days of the Scottish Second Reformation. How is it that we have made no improvement since the Reformation? Unless we became complacent. How did we become complacent? The devil used the Catholic Church to make us complacent. We became friends with the Catholic Church and we completely stopped advancing. The church on earth made all the advancements under persecution, but has made little to no advancements whatsoever under this time of peace and toleration. It has been completely deceived by the devil's guile, his second method. Yet in spite of the fact that the church as a whole has made little progress in doctrine and worship since the Reformation, it has increased in size. And this compelled the devil to make his final assault upon the true church, which we come to in our third point, just verse 17, the devil's third method, final open war. This has yet to come. Verse 17, then the dragon was wroth with the woman, that means mad, and went and made war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Some Christians may be happy that they have gotten to live in a time of toleration and religious freedom. I know we're not. We're irritated by it. But little do they know that the moral carpet has been pulled out from under their feet. And the Bible told us this was going to happen, by the way. We should have known this was going to happen. Now in this one verse, we come to the third method of the dragon. This seems very much like a time we are experiencing now or about to experience. It is the final stages of Antichrist, and the devil is running out of time, and he now makes one final push, a final attempt to completely silence the true church. Because of his work in deceiving the nations into complacency with notions such as tolerance, liberality, and reason, the nations are ready to help the devil to do his work. The liberal churches are just doing the work of the devil now. Unfortunately for the devil, not everyone has been deceived. The remnant of true believers have not been lulled into complacency. We're told that the growth of the true church has made the dragon wroth with the woman. During this stage, the devil knows that his time is now severely limited, and so he takes radical action. The response of the dragon is that it's going to be to make war. The church may have enjoyed its period of toleration, but as it becomes more visible, the response of the dragons is renewed rage and persecution. This third method of persecution will take place towards the end of the 1260 years of apostasy. So it began with apostasy during the Reformation. In the middle, we had some toleration, the age we live in now, but it will go back to ending with persecution. During this third and future method, it will appear that the whole witnessing church has been destroyed or silenced. This is the killing of the two witnesses that we read about in the last days of the papacy. We can only guess the forms that this will take because we haven't experienced it yet, but it likely involves most or many of the governments of the world turning against Christianity. It is likely that laws will be passed and nations will agree to limit or silence the voice of Christianity, much like we're beginning to see today. The devil will grow impatient with his own method of complacency, seeing that his time is running out to completely deceive the nations. It will be a time in which hatred for Christianity will defy all reason, like we see today. Why do people hate Christianity? I don't know. I can't figure it out. It defies all reason. No longer will the devil be satisfied with moderate Christianity, but he will want to see every form of Christianity silenced. The mode of attack is to be different from what it was in the second struggle. Now the devil will make war with the remnant. This will be a time of open violence, cheered on by civil governments. Then the two witnesses will be slain and silenced for a period of 3.5 years. The text here concludes this verse by giving us one attribute that will define the true church, and it's not toleration for other religions or religious compromise. And it's not toleration of false doctrine, and it's not toleration of false worship, or some kind of universal love for all people, or finding a safe middle ground. That's not how the true church is defined in this verse. The remnants are defined as those who adhere strictly to the commandments of God. They will not compromise the commandments of God, not introduce nor permit to be introduced any corruption into the doctrines of grace or into the matter of God's worship. That'll be the true people. Those who relax the commandments will be safe from the dragon. It is only those who keep the commandments of God that will command the attention of the dragon in that final war, open war with the dragon. Let us pray.